The lion in the painting stared back at Chijioke, proud and untamed, its golden mane catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows. Chijioke shifted in his leather armchair, unable to match the creature's unwavering gaze. Here he sat, in a room worth more than most people's homes, surrounded by everything money could buy, yet feeling smaller than he'd ever felt before. A soft breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open window, along with the distant sound of laughter, Amara's laughter. His wife was entertaining guests by the pool again, her voice musical and charming as always. The same voice that, just yesterday, he'd heard speaking so sharply to the elderly housekeeper when she thought no one was listening. Chijioke closed his eyes, trying to reconcile the two versions of his wife. The breathtakingly beautiful woman who dazzled their social circle, and the person he'd glimpsed in unguarded moments, when her smile fell away and something harder took its place. The contrast gnawed at him, a splinter in his mind he couldn't ignore. "Epatio," the familiar voice broke through his thoughts. Chijioke turned to find his father, Chief Obin, standing in the doorway. The older man caught an imposing figure despite his slight lean on a wooden walking stick, his white kaftan, crisp and immaculate, his eyes sharp with the wisdom that had guided their family for decades. "Your mother used to say you made that same face as a child," Chief Obin said, crossing the room with measured steps. "Whenever something troubled your heart, but couldn't find its way to your tongue." A small smile tugged at Chijioke's lips. "You always could read me, Papa." Chief Obin settled into the chair opposite his son, placing his walking stick carefully beside him. The afternoon light caught the silver in his beard as he studied Chijioke's face. "So, tell me, my son, why do you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders?" Chijioke glanced toward the window, where Amara's laughter still floated on the breeze. His voice dropped lower, though they were alone in the vast room. "Papa, I've been thinking about Amara, about whether she truly loves me for who I am, or if she loves what being my wife gives her." If the words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken observations. Chief Obin didn't respond immediately, his fingers drumming softly on the armrest of his chair. "That's a serious thought, my son. What makes you question her love?" "Small things, Papa. The way she treats our staff when she thinks I'm not around. I've heard her speak to them." Chijioke paused, the memory making him wince. "Last week, I overheard her berating our housekeeper, Mama Chinua, over a tiny water stain on a tablecloth. Her voice was so cold, so different from how she speaks to me or our friends. It made me wonder, what if she's just as good at pretending with me?" Chief Obin leaned forward, his walking stick tapping thoughtfully against the marble floor. "A person's true character," he said slowly, "shows itself in how they treat those they believe can't benefit them." He paused, a subtle gleam entering his eyes. "But feelings and suspicions aren't enough, my son. You need to know the truth." Chijioke ran a hand over his face. "Exactly, Papa. But how? I can't just ask her outright. If I'm wrong, I've wounded our marriage with mistrust, and if I'm right..." He let the sentence trail off, unable to finish the thought. The room fell quiet save for the distant sounds of the party and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Chief Obin's fingers continued their steady rhythm on the armrest, his expression thoughtful. Then, slowly, a smile began to form beneath his silver beard. "I have an idea," he said, and something in his tone made Chijioke sit up straighter. "But you have to trust me completely." "I Sides, Amara's laughter rang out again, bright and beautiful, but now it seemed to carry a question mark, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Chijioke leaned forward, his heart beating faster as he met his father's knowing gaze. "Tell me, Papa, what do you have in mind?" Chief Obin leaned forward, his walking stick planted firmly between his feet, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What if we could see how Amara treats people when she thinks they have nothing to offer her, when she believes they're just ordinary workers with no connection to power or wealth?" Chijioke's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Papa?" Obin studied too, Chief Obin said, his eyes twinkling with the cleverness of his plan. "Live here, do the work. See how she treats me when she thinks I'm just an old man working for her husband." Thus, ejection hung in the air like suspended dust in the afternoon light. Chijioke stared at his father, waiting for the joke, the punchline that didn't come. Through the window, the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter drifted in from Amara's gathering, creating an almost surreal backdrop to this extraordinary conversation. "Papa," Chijioke finally managed, rising from his chair in agitation, "you want to pretend to be a Gateman? But you're a chief. People will think I've lost my mind letting my own father work as a Gateman. The whole community will talk." Chief Obin chuckled, the sound rich and warm like aged palm wine. "Since when did you start caring more about what people think than what is true?" He stood as well, his movements deliberate and dignified despite his walking stick. "Besides, who would recognize me? I won't be wearing my coral beads or royal wrapper. I'll be in simple clothes, doing simple work. People see what they expect to see, my son." Chijioke began pacing, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. "But Papa, it's not just about recognition. Being a gatesman is hard work, opening and closing gates all day, standing in the sun." He paused, looking at his father with concern. "You're not as young as you used to be. You think I'm too old?" Chief Obin's eyebrows rose, and for a moment Chijioke saw the flash of the formidable man who had built their family's fortune from nothing. "I've lived through a civil war, built businesses from the ground up, and raised you alone after your mother passed. A few days of opening gates won't kill me." The mention of his mother made Chijioke's heart twist. She had been gone for 15 years, but her wisdom still echoed in their lives. What would she think of this situation, of Amara, of this plan? "Still, Papa," Chijioke said, softer now, "if Amara finds out..." "She won't," Chief Obin said with quiet confidence. "Trust me, my son. I raised you to be a good man, to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their status. Now, I want to see if your wife shares those values. If she does, wonderful, but if she doesn't..." He let the sentence hang unfinished. Chijioke sank back into his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The lion in the painting seemed to watch their exchange with renewed interest, its painted eyes holding secrets of their own. "We'll need to plan this carefully," Chief Obin continued, warming to his scheme. "I'll need different clothes, nothing too new, nothing too old. Something that says dignified worker but not wealthy man in disguise. I'll need to change how I walk, how I speak." He tapped his walking stick thoughtfully. "Even this will need to look more worn, less like a chief's staff, and more like an old man's support." As his father spoke, Chijioke could already see the transformation beginning in his mind's eye. The proud chief becoming invisible, unremarkable, just another phase in the staff quarters. The thought both impressed and disturbed him. "And what about your other responsibilities, Papa? The council meetings, the community duties?" "Oh, I'll tell them I'm traveling to see your uncle in Canada." Nobody questions long trips to see family overseas these days. Chief Obin smiled, clearly pleased with how the pieces of his plan were falling into place. The real question, my son, is, are you ready for what we might discover? Chijioke looked toward the window again. The party sounds had died down, but he could still hear Amara's voice, giving instructions to the house staff about cleaning up. Was her tone sharp or kind? From this distance, he couldn't tell. We do this, he said slowly, each word measured and careful. We need rules. Ways to communicate safely, times to meet and discuss what you observe. And most importantly, Papa, you must promise me something. What's that, my son? If it becomes too much, the work, the deception, any of it, you'll tell me immediately. We'll end it, find another way. Chief Obin's face softened with affection. You're a good son to worry about your old father, but trust me, I've played harder roles in my life. Now, he said, his voice taking on a more practical tone, let's work out the details. We'll need a story for how you found your new gateman. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Chief Obin stood before his mirror, studying his transformation. Gone were the flowing agbada and coral beads that marked his status. Instead, he wore faded trousers that had been carefully selected from a second-hand market, a worn but clean shirt, and dusty sandals that had seen better days. Look, his usual proud posture had been replaced by a slight stoop, and he practiced walking with his stick as though it were truly necessary rather than ceremonial. Remember, he muttered to his reflection, you are Paro now, not Chief Obin, not anyone's father, just Paro, the new gateman. A soft knock at his door interrupted his rehearsal. Chijioke entered, closing the door quietly behind him. His son's eyes widened at the sight of him. Tuyochi Bada, cried he when he saw the little boy. Go and get some water. Papa, Chijioke whispered, I barely recognize you. Good, Chief Obin replied with a satisfied nod. That's exactly what we want. He picked up the small bag containing his few belongings, carefully chosen to match his new status. Is everything ready? Yes. The house manager will introduce you to Amara at exactly 9 o'clock. I've told her we're hiring a new gateman on Mrs. Okoro's recommendation. Chijioke paused, worry creasing his brow. Are you absolutely sure about this, Papa? Chief Obin placed a weathered hand on his son's shoulder. The truth is never comfortable, my son, but it's always necessary. Now, remember, from this moment on, I'm just Paro. Treat me as you would any other staff member. The drive to the mansion was quiet. Both men lost in their thoughts. They entered through the service entrance, where the house manager, Mrs. Blessing, waited. She was one of the few staff members who knew the truth, chosen for her discretion and loyalty to the family. Good morning, Pa, Mrs. Blessing called herself. Good morning, Mr. Paro. Welcome to your new workplace. Inside the mansion, Amara was already awake, scrolling through her phone in the living room. She wore a silk robe that probably cost more than a year's salary for the average worker, her hair wrapped in a designer scarf. When Mrs. Blessing knocked on the doorframe, she didn't look up immediately. Yes, Amara's voice carried that slight edge of impatience that Chijioke had begun noticing more and more lately. Madam, good morning. This is Mr. Paro, our new gateman. He comes highly recommended by Mrs. Okoro. Finally, Amara looked up, her eyes scanning over Chief Obin's disguised form with barely concealed disinterest. There was no sign of recognition in her gaze, no hint that she saw anything more than an old man in worn clothes. Fine, she said, already looking back at her phone. Show him what to do, and make sure he understands about opening the gate quickly when I'm returning home. The last one always made me wait. Yes, madam, Chief Obin replied, his voice pitched slightly higher than normal, adding a subtle tremor that made him sound older, more uncertain. I will do my best. Was Amara's only response, a dismissive sound that spoke volumes. As Mrs. Blessing led him out to show him the gatehouse and his duties, Chief Obin caught a glimpse of his son watching from the study doorway. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, both knew that the real test was just beginning. The gatehouse was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chair, and a tiny table, a far cry from Chief Obin's usual accommodations. But he nodded approvingly as Mrs. Blessing showed him around. Mrs. Blessing showed him around. The morning shift starts at 6 a.m., she explained, her voice carrying its normal volume, but her eyes conveying additional meaning. Madam usually leaves around 9 a.m. for her appointments. She expects the gates to be open before she reaches it. I understand, Chief Obin said, setting his bag down on the bed. And what are her other expectations? Mrs. Blessing's eyes darted briefly toward the main house. Madame likes things done quickly and without questions. She doesn't, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She doesn't like to be kept waiting or to explain things twice. Chief Obin noted the careful way Mrs. Blessing spoke, the things she wasn't saying but was clearly trying to convey. Already he was gathering information, building a picture of how things truly operated in his son's household. As the day progressed, Chief Obin settled into his role. He opened and closed the gate for delivery vehicles, garden workers, and Amara's friends who came to visit. Each time, he played his part perfectly. The slight stoop, the careful movements, the deferential tone. And each time, he watched and listened, especially when Amara was present. The same time, he watched and listened, especially when Amara was present. By evening, when Chijioke's car pulled into the driveway, Chief Obin had already counted 3 instances where Amara had spoken sharply to staff members, though never when Chijioke was within earshot. Her tone changed completely when addressing her friends or her husband, becoming warm, charming, even playful. Later that night, in the privacy of the gatehouse, father and son met briefly to discuss the day's observations. She didn't recognize me at all, Chief Obin said quietly. Not even a flicker of doubt. Ano gohotin punta Dinis, ano behavior? Chijioke asked, his voice equally low. It's too early to draw conclusions, Chief Obin replied carefully, but I'm watching. We'll know soon enough what kind of person your wife truly is when she thinks no one important is looking. As they parted for the night, the weight of what they were doing settled heavily on both their shoulders. They were pulling at a thread that could unravel everything. But sometimes, as Chief Obin had said, the truth was necessary, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. A week into his role as Gateman, Chief Obin had developed a routine. Each morning, he would sweep the driveway before sunrise, the rhythmic sound of bristles against concrete filling the quiet air. He kept his head down, played his part, and watched as Amara's true nature revealed itself in increasingly troubling ways. The first major incident occurred on a Tuesday morning. Amara was running late for a charity board meeting, her heels clicking impatiently against the driveway as she approached her car. Chief Obin moved to open the gate, but his hand slipped on the latch, causing a momentary delay. Paro, her voice cracked like a whip in the morning air. What is wrong with you? Do you think I have all day to stand here waiting? I'm sorry, madam, he mumbled, quickly correcting his creep. The latch was. I don't want excuses, She cut him off, her perfectly made-up face twisting with disdain. Just do your job properly. Or is that too much to ask? From his position by the gate, Chief Obin caught sight of the gardener and his assistant quickly looking away, their bodies tense with familiar discomfort. This wasn't the first time they'd witnessed such a scene, he realized. It was just the first time with him. Later that same week, Amara's treatment of the staff grew more pronounced. She berated the housekeeper for using the wrong polish on the dining room table, her voice carrying through the open windows to where Chief Obin stood at his post. "Are you blind?" he heard her say. "Look at these tricks. Do I have to teach you how to do every little thing? Maybe I should just do it myself, since none of you seem capable of basic tasks." The housekeeper's quiet apologies were met with a dismissive wave and a sharp, "Just fix it, and don't let me see mistakes like this again." On Friday, Chief Obin deliberately created a small test. He left a section of the driveway unswept, wanting to see how Amara would handle a minor imperfection in her carefully controlled ward. Her reaction exceeded even his expectations. Bro, he said, shouted Bro, he shouted, pointing from the gatehouse. Amara stood pointing at the ground, her designer handbag swinging wildly from her arm. "What is this? Did you forget how to sweep? Or are you just becoming lazy in your old age?" "I apologize, madam," he said, bowing slightly. "I must have missed." "Missed it? How could you miss it? It's right here in plain sight." Her voice rose with each word. "First the gate, now this. Maybe you're too old for this job. Maybe we need someone younger, someone who can actually see what they're doing." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Chief Obin kept his eyes downcast, but his hands tightened almost imperceptibly on his broom. In all his years as a chief, he had never spoken to anyone with such contempt, not even to those who had truly wronged him. That evening, when he met with Chijioke in the quiet of the gatehouse, his son could barely contain his anger. "She threatened to fire you, Papa," Chijioke whispered, his fists clenched. "Over some dust on the driveway." "Keep your voice down," Chief Obin cautioned, though his own heart was heavy. "And yes, she did. But more importantly, did you notice how none of the other staff seemed surprised? This is normal for them, my son. This is what they live with every day." The following week brought new revelations. During a lunch party Amara hosted for her friends, Chief Obin overheard her speaking about the staff in a way that made his blood run cold. "You have to be firm with them," she was saying, her voice carrying clearly to where he stood. "They are like children, really. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. The key is to keep them in their place." Her friends laughed appreciatively, none of them seeming to notice or care about the servers, who could clearly hear every word. Chief Obin watched as the young waiter's hands trembled slightly while pouring water, his face a careful mask of indifference that spoke of long practice. The incidents continued to mount. A misplaced delivery resulted in Amara berating the entire household staff. A slight delay in opening the gates led to another threat of dismissal. Each time, her reactions grew more extreme, her words sharper, her contempt more evident. But it was her interaction with Mama Chinua, the elderly housekeeper who had served the household for over a decade, that finally pushed things to a breaking point. Chief Obin watched from his post as Amara reduced the woman to tears over a minor mistake in the laundry. "Useless," Amara spat, throwing the supposedly improperly pressed dress at Mama Chinua's feet. "Completely useless. Pick it up and do it again, and don't you dare cry. Tears won't fix your incompetence." That night, as Chief Obin recounted the day's events to his son, He could see the last of Chijioke's illusions about his wife crumbling. I knew she could be sharp sometimes, Chijioke said, his voice hollow. But this cruelty, Papa, how could I have been so blind? Chief Obin placed a weather hand on his son's shoulder. We see what we want to see in those we love, he said gently. But now you are seeing the truth. The question is, what will you do with it? The plan came together quickly. Chijioke announced a week-long business trip to Dubai, watching carefully as Amara's reaction shifted from initial disappointment to barely concealed calculation. Don't forget to transfer money to my account before you leave, she said, her goodbye kiss landing lightly on his cheek. I have some important shopping to do this week. Tueli anege po, you'll never know. Kokemo too, he replied, studying her face as if seeing it for the first time. I wouldn't want you to go without anything you need. As his car pulled out of the driveway that morning, Chijioke caught sight of his father in the rearview mirror, sweeping the path with practiced care. Instead of heading to the airport, he circled back through a secluded service entrance, slipping quietly into the gatehouse where his father had prepared a small space for him. The walls are thin, Chief Obin warned, gesturing to the humble room. We must be careful not to speak above a whisper. Are you sure about this, my son? Chijioke nodded, setting down his small bag. I need to see for myself, Papa. All of it. He didn't have to wait long. Barely an hour after his departure, Amara's true nature emerged with stunning clarity. The first incident occurred when a delivery truck arrived with her latest online shopping purchases. Incompetent fools, her voice carried clearly through the gatehouse window. I specifically ordered overnight delivery. This is 2 days late. Do you think my time is worthless? The delivery man's apologetic explanation about traffic and delays was cut short by Amara's sharp dismissal. Just get out. And don't expect a tip for this terrible service. Nothing's good. What's a princess? Chijioke watched through his window as the man trudged back to his truck, shoulders slumped. He'd seen this delivery man before, always cheerful, always careful with the packages. Now he understood why the man's smile had grown strained over recent months. Throughout the day, Amara's behavior painted a picture that Chijioke could no longer ignore. She snapped at the gardener for trimming the roses too short, berated the cook for buying the wrong brand of olive oil, and reduced a young maid to tears over a slightly crooked tablecloth. Useless, all of you, she declared during an afternoon tirade. I don't know why I bother trying to maintain standards in this house. None of you understand quality or excellence. From his hidden vantage point, Chijioke observed the staff's reactions. They moved like dancers in a well-rehearsed performance, ducking their heads, avoiding eye contact, murmuring apologies, and scurrying away at the first opportunity. This wasn't new behavior. This was survival instinct, honed over time. The most revealing moment came when Amara hosted her friend Linda for lunch. The transformation was immediate and jarring. Gone was the harsh voice and cruel words, replaced by melodious laughter and gracious smiles. She complimented the same food she had criticized earlier, praised the table setting she had condemned, and spoke warmly about her wonderful household staff. "You are so lucky to have such good help," Linda commented, sipping her wine. "Oh yes," Amara replied, her voice honey-sweet. "We treat them like family here. It's so important to be kind to those who serve us, don't you think?" Chijioke felt his stomach turn. In the gatehouse, he pressed his hands against his eyes, trying to erase the image of the stranger who wore his wife's face. His father found him like that hours later, when the sun had begun to set. "Now you see," Chief Obin said softly, placing a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. This is who she becomes when she thinks you're not watching. How long? Chijoke's voice was hoarse. How long has she been treating people this way? How did I not notice? Love can blind us to many things, his father replied. But it's not just about how she treats the staff, my son. It's about who she truly is. Someone who can switch between cruelty and kindness so easily. Who sees nothing wrong with hurting those she considers beneath her. What does that say about her heart? The question hung in the air as night fell over the mansion. Through the thin walls of the gatehouse, they could hear Amara's voice rising again, berating someone about a misplaced pair of shoes. Each sharp word, each cutting remark felt like a knife in Chijioke's heart. I can't just confront her, he said finally. She'll deny it, say it's all a misunderstanding, or worst, she'll apologize and pretend to change, but only because she knows I'm watching. Chief Obi nodded slowly. Then perhaps it's time for a different kind of revelation. One she can't deny or explain away. As they sat in the growing darkness, father and son began to plan the final act of their test, a revelation that would force Amara to face the truth about herself and force everyone else to see the truth about her. The morning of Chijioke's birthday dawned bright and clear. The mansion buzzed with activity as staff members prepared for the celebration, their movements careful and precise under Amara's exacting supervision. She moved through the house like a perfectly dressed storm, finding fault with everything from the flower arrangements to the placement of the cutlery. Not even a little square squeezed aside for the husband. No, skittle, the menu must be just okay. Did any of you do anything right? She snapped at the catering staff. The appetizer trays should be symmetrical. Symmetrical. Do I need to spell it out for you? Chief Obin watched from his post by the gate as guests began to arrive. Each car that pulled up received his humble bow. Each guest passed him without a second glance. Only he knew what was about to unfold. The party was in full swing when Chijioke made his entrance. He hadn't been seen at the mansion for days, supposedly away on his business trip. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as he walked in, his face set in lines of quiet determination. Chijioke! Amara's voice rang out with practiced warmth as she hurried toward him. My love, you're back! What a wonderful surprise! He accepted her embrace without returning it, his eyes scanning the room. Yes, I'm back. And there's something important we need to discuss. Now? Namara's smile flickered slightly. But darling, all our friends are here to celebrate your birthday. Perfect, Chijioke replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Because what I have to say should be heard by everyone. He turned to address the crowd. Before we continue this celebration, there's someone I'd like you all to meet properly. He moved toward the door. Papa, please come in. The room erupted in confused murmurs as Chief Obin entered, still dressed in his gateman's clothes. He walked with his usual slight stoop, his worn sandals scuffing softly against the polished floor. Amara's face drained of color as she looked between Chijioke and the man she knew as Sparrow. What is this? She asked, her voice uncertain. Why is the gateman here? The gateman? Chijioke's voice was quiet but clear. Look again, Amara. Look carefully at the man you've been shouting at for weeks. The man you threatened to fire over tiny mistakes. The man you treated like he was less than human. Chief Obin straightened slowly, letting his practiced stop fall away. He lifted his chin, and suddenly the bearing of a chief was unmistakable. The transformation was subtle but profound. In the set of his shoulders, the look in his eyes, the dignity that no one clothes could disguise. Amara's hands flew to her mouth as recognition dawned. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." "Yes," Chijioke said. "This is my father, Chief Obin, the man you've been treating like dirt beneath your feet." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Several guests stepped back as if trying to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Amara swayed slightly, reaching for a nearby chair to steady herself. I didn't know," she stammered. "If I had known." "That's exactly the point," Chief Obin spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom and disappointment. "You shouldn't need to know someone's status to treat them with basic human dignity. Every time," Chijioke continued, "while you thought I was away on business trips, I was here, watching, listening, seeing how you treat people when you think no one who matters is looking. What do you think of me?" Tears began to roll down Amara's cheeks, smearing her perfect makeup. "Please," she begged, looking frantically between father and son. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Chijioke's voice rose slightly. "Explain how you humiliated Mama Chinua over a water stain, how you threatened to fire staff over tiny mistakes, how you speak about the workers when you're with your friends, calling them stupid and worthless." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Amara sank to her knees, her designer dress pulling around her on the floor. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I never meant." "You meant every word," Chief Obin said quietly. "Every sharp comment, every cruel dismissal. We saw your true face, the one you hide from my son, the one you hide from your friends, the one that only those you consider beneath you get to see." The staff had gathered at the edges of the room, watching with a mixture of shock and vindication. The housekeeper was crying silently, years of accumulated hurt finding release in this moment of truth. Chijioke looked at his wife, kneeling on the floor. She had earlier scolded someone for not polishing properly. The woman he had loved, still loved in some wounded way, revealed at last in the harsh light of truth. "The question now," he said, his voice heavy with pain and resolution, "is what happens next. Can someone who shows two such different faces to the world ever be trusted to show their true one? Can someone who thinks nothing of crushing others beneath their feet ever learn to walk beside them instead?" The mansion fell into an uneasy silence after most of the guests had departed. Those few who remained lingered at the edges of the room, witnesses to the aftermath of a marriage unraveling. The birthday cake sat untouched on the dining table, its carefully piped decorations a mockery of celebration. Amara remained on her knees, her tears having carved dark channels through her makeup. Her hands, usually so graceful in their movements, twisted together in her lap like trapped birds. Chijioke stood near the window, his silhouette stark against the setting sun, while Chief Obin occupied a chair with the quiet dignity that no amount of worn clothing could diminish. "I can change," Amara whispered into the heavy silence. "Please, give me a chance to show you I can be different." Chijioke turned from the window, his face etched with the weight of decision. "Different?" he asked softly. "Or will you just be more careful about who sees your cruelty?" "No," she shook her head frantically. "I mean truly different. I see now. I see what I've become." She looked around the room, really seeing the staff for perhaps the first time. "I've been horrible to all of you. The way I've spoken to you, treated you." Her voice broke. "There's no excuse." Chief Obin leaned forward in his chair, his one walking stick tapping gently against the floor. "You're right. There is no excuse," he said, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom earned through years of observing human nature. "But there might be a reason. Tell me, Amara, why do you feel the need to step on others, to feel tall?" The question hung in the air like smoke, making everyone's eyes sting with its truth. Amara's shoulders slumped, as if the weight of her actions had finally become too heavy to bear. "Ooh," she started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I grew up with nothing," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were so poor. Other people looked down on us. I promised myself that once I had money, once I had position, I would never feel small again." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, I became the very thing I hated. I made others feel small to prove I was big." The housekeeper, Mama Chinua, stepped forward from the gathering of staff. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her voice was steady. "We all have our struggles, madam, but pain doesn't give us the right to cause pain." Chijioke moved from the window to stand before his wife. "If there's to be any future for us," he said quietly, "it starts with this moment. Not with promises or tears, but with real change. You'll need help. We'll need help. Professional counseling for a start." "Anything," Amara nodded quickly. "I'll do anything." "And," Chief Obin added, rising from his chair, "you need to make amends, not just with words, but with actions. Every person in this household deserves to be treated with respect, not because they might secretly be a chief in disguise, but because they are human beings worthy of dignity." Up rising from his chair, Chief Obin added. Amara turned to face the staff, her voice trembling but sincere. "I know sorry isn't enough. I know I've hurt you, all of you, deeply and repeatedly. I don't expect forgiveness, but if you're willing to give me the chance, I want to prove that I can be better. I want to learn to be the kind of person who lifts others up instead of pushing them down." The staff exchanged glances, years of shared experiences passing between them in silent communication. Finally, the cook stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Actions speak louder than words, madam. Show us, with time and consistency, that you mean what you say." Chijioke nodded slowly. "That goes for a marriage too," he said. "I love you, Amara, but love without respect is like a house built on sand. We'll need to rebuild from the foundation up." "Alatheo sorry mame, atoyemi newu." Chief Obin moved toward the door, his walk now straight and proud. "My work here is done," he said, looking at his son with quiet pride. "The truth is out in the light where it belongs. What grows from this moment depends on all of you." He turned to Amara. "Remember, daughter-in-law, true character isn't about how you treat your equals or your betters. It's about how you treat those who can do nothing for you in return." As the sun set outside, casting long shadows through the windows, the mansion felt different. Something had broken here today, but perhaps in that breaking lay the seeds of something better. Amara rose slowly from the floor, wiping her tears away with a shaking hand. "Thank you," she said to Chief Obin, "for showing me the truth about myself, even though it hurt. And thank you," she turned to the staff, "for being willing to give me a chance to prove I can change." The future stretched before them, uncertain but holding possibility. Whether Amara would truly transform, whether the wounds of the past could heal, whether trust, once broken, could be rebuilt, only time would tell. But as the household began to stir back to life, there was a sense that at least now they were dealing with truth instead of illusion, reality instead of pretense. Sometimes that's where real change begins.